Hello, friends. Tonight, we'll uncover the strangest medieval punishments you've probably never heard of. From shameful public parades echoing through narrow streets to bizarre penalties beyond imagination, we're stepping into the shadows of the Middle Ages. If these quiet journeys into history bring you comfort, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and share in the comments where and when you're listening. Now, dim the lights, pull your blanket closer, and let's discover the secrets of the strangest punishments in medieval history. Welcome to a time where darkness and silence reigns supreme. As night deepens and we journey into the recesses of our minds, I invite you to pull back the curtain on the most bizarre and chilling punishments of medieval Europe. Perhaps these ancient tales will lead you to peaceful slumber after contemplating the echoes of justice from a bygone era. In the bustling cities, quiet countrysides, and secluded corners of grim castles in the Middle Ages, crime and punishment were very different from today. Laws were often brutal, and execution methods sometimes defied imagination. Some punishments were so strange they're almost incomprehensible to the modern mind. So, why did these peculiar practices exist? And what did they mean to the people of medieval Europe? Tonight, we'll glimpse into forgotten cells, torture chambers, and public squares from centuries past. Remember, this is not just a story, but a dark reflection of history. Gently close your eyes and let my voice carry you deeper into this strange world. Our journey begins in the peculiar depths of public humiliation, starting with a fashion statement you definitely didn't want to make. The drunkard's cloak. Imagine, you've had too many flagons of ale, the attempting to serenade a pig kind of drunk. Your poor judgment caught the eye of local authorities. Their solution: a large wooden barrel hollowed out with holes for your head and arms. You are, quite literally, transformed into a walking, creaking keg of regret. Picture yourself shuffling through cobbled streets, faint scent of stale wine emanating from your wooden enclosure. Every awkward step met with quiet murmurs and curious glances. It was designed to make you memorable, and it succeeded. Children would point, neighbors exchanged knowing glances, and local gossips find fresh material. This wasn't about breaking bones. It was about breaking spirits. Gently, with the subtle squeak of wood and lingering aroma of embarrassment. In the grand scheme of medieval punishments, it was almost merciful. A humiliating promenade, but a lesson learned, often accompanied by a profound thirst. Consider the physical burden of that barrel, pressing on your shoulders, chafing your neck with every hesitant movement. Sun or biting chill beats down as you navigate the uneven cobblestones. Whispers follow like an insistent, invisible cloud weaving through daily life. You pick out snippets of conversation, a child's giggle, a merchant bartering, all subtly directed towards your display. There's no escaping the gazes, no corner to hide. Every face holds a flicker of amusement or a stern, judging look, reflecting collective morality. It's a solitary parade, a theater of one, designed to engrave the lesson upon your memory and the collective consciousness of the town. It speaks volumes without a single word, a silent declaration of your folly to all who bear witness. This public spectacle, though mild compared to more brutal medieval justice, carried profound psychological weight. Imagine the agonizingly slow passage of time as you are compelled to move through familiar streets. Now a cruel stage for your shame. The urge to disappear must be overwhelming. Yet you are captive not merely by the barrel, but by the unyielding gaze of your community. This correction aimed to reintegrate the offender, but only after a thorough public cleansing of their reputation. It was a societal reset button for minor transgressions, reminding everyone of strict moral codes. The rough wood, limited visibility, and echoing sounds within all contributed to a deeply unpleasant experience. For us, Observing from a tranquil distance, it becomes a curious echo from the past, a historical oddity. The dimensions of the drunkard's cloak varied, but the principle remained consistent: cumbersome, conspicuous, undignified. Some barrels might engulf the torso, transforming the wearer into a caricature of intemperance. Others were smaller, like a heavy wooden tunic. Regardless, the message was stark: your misbehavior will be paraded. Public nature meant humiliation wasn't fleeting. It was a memory woven into the town's fabric. Every time you walked those streets, a knowing glance would serve as a subtle, persistent reminder of your time as the town's ambulatory cautionary tale. This correction rooted in medieval understanding of community and morality. In an age devoid of widespread literacy or sophisticated prisons, public shame was an extraordinarily effective tool for maintaining social order. It operated on the principle that fear of public ridicule and harsh social ostracism could be more powerful than physical pain for certain offenses. It reinforced social bonds by establishing clear boundaries involving the entire community, transforming a private transgression into a widely observed public lesson. Laughter, pointing fingers, thrown scraps all contributed to the uncomfortable theatrical experience of medieval justice. As the sun dipped, casting long shadows, the image of the waddling figure would slowly recede, but never entirely disappear from folklore. From the cumbersome confines of the walking barrel, our focus shifts to a sensation perhaps more refreshing, yet no less humiliating: the cucking stool. This ingenious device was medieval Europe's version of a sit and splash punishment, predominantly for those accused of scolding, a term encompassing nagging, gossiping, or simply being too outspoken. The physical setup was simple: a sturdy wooden chair, often crudely constructed and uncomfortable, attached to a long beam suspended above water. You, the condemned, strapped in, then paraded through the winding streets. This maximized public exposure. Following this ignominious parade, the beam would swing out and you would be unceremoniously dunked. Not once, but repeatedly plunged into whatever convenient water source the town had: a cool river, a murky village pond, or a particularly unsavory ditch. The overarching idea was to cool your temper, effectively translating to publicly breaking your spirit. Each successive splash, chilling immersion, was intended to render you calmer, wetter, and less inclined to voice opinions so loudly. Even men, particularly fraudsters or liars, could find themselves uncomfortably seated in the cucking stool, usually to the immense delight of the town's assembled folk. If your crime involved money, someone might gleefully shout, "Hope you can swim in debt." The word cucking itself derived from an older word meaning to defecate, offering a crude yet accurate description given the questionable quality of some medieval waterways. This punishment, though physically harmless, left a lasting mark of profound public ridicule, reminding that humiliation worked with cold water. Imagine the sudden, shocking gasp as cold water envelops you, pulling you momentarily beneath the surface. A fleeting disorientation, followed by biting chill. Then, the upward hoist, bringing you gasping back into crisp air, dripping and shivering, only to be lowered once more. The echoing splash, sharp, derisive laughter. Chilling air against wet skin, these sensations combine to forge a deeply uncomfortable and unforgettable experience. Yet, within this discomfort, existed a strange medieval logic. The intent wasn't to drown you, but to drown your unruly spirit, to wash away perceived transgressions with the cold public judgment. It was a baptism by shame, meticulously designed to humble and forcibly correct behavior. The cucking stool served as an extraordinarily powerful deterrent, particularly for those whose influence stemmed from their words. Its purpose was clear: to effectively silence a persistent gossip to forcefully humble an argumentative shrew, or to publicly expose a cunning cheat. The chair itself, rudimentary and uncomfortable, ensured the physical experience was far from pleasant even before the dunking. You might initially be wheeled through town, allowing anticipation to build, crowds to gather, jeers growing louder. The sense of profound vulnerability must have been immense, exposed to every eye, every voice, as they were paraded towards their watery fate. The collective gaze, murmurs, and taunts formed an inescapable prison of judgment. Then, the inescapable moment of repeated immersion. The sudden raw shock of cold water, often murky and laden with debris, presented a stark contrast to the air. You would emerge gasping desperately, hair plastered, clothing heavy and clinging. The successive dips were a methodical process of breaking down resistance, intended to leave the individual not only physically drenched, but mentally subdued. It was a visceral reminder of the power of community censure. Even after release, the memory of cold water, echoing laughter, and soaking clothes would linger, a constant, unpleasant companion. This was the medieval way of cooling fiery tempers, a stark public lesson in silence, conformity, and obedience. The cucking stool was more than a ducking chair. Its mechanism, a pivoting beam or wheeled contraption, made it highly mobile and adaptable. This meant punishment could be administered at different points, extending humiliation's reach. Sometimes, mounted on wheels, it paraded the condemned through Market Square, maximizing exposure. The journey to the water became part of the spectacle, building anticipation and intensifying the ordeal. Cries and taunts would follow, a symphony of public disapproval that pierced dignity. The water source played a cruel role in severity. While some were plunged into a clean river, others submerged in the village pond, often stagnant and used for waste. The added indignity of foul water and disease risk transformed the cucking stool into a potential health hazard. Yet, medieval mindset often saw such suffering as divine justice, purification through humiliation. It was believed cold shock and public outcry would douse unruly spirits or deceitful ways. For women, the cucking stool carried an additional layer of societal judgment. Their scolding was perceived as a disruption to patriarchal order. Thus, the public act of silencing and humiliating them served as a stark reminder of their expected place. While men faced this for fraud or verbal transgressions, for women, it was frequently linked to speech itself, its volume, content, or the act of speaking out of turn. This added a gendered dimension to the humiliation, reinforcing societal expectations through public display. Our journey into the peculiar punishments of medieval Europe continues, moving from public humiliation to the specific consequences faced by those who dared to disrupt the fragile order of medieval commerce. Our focus now turns to the unique, often inventive ways in which the medieval justice system handled theft. Far from the sterile courtrooms and penitentiaries of today, medieval towns dealt with thieves in ways that served as both retribution and a very public spectacle, designed to deter any who might consider pilfering their neighbor's goods. Imagine a bustling medieval market, vibrant with the shouts of vendors and the clamor of trade. Suddenly, a commotion breaks out. A quick-fingered individual, perhaps driven by hunger or desperation, has been caught with a loaf of bread, a piece of cloth, or a few coins that are not their own. The immediate consequence wasn't a fine or a lengthy prison sentence, but rather a direct, often physical and always public, form of correction. One particularly notable punishment for petty theft, especially for those caught stealing food, was the pillory. But with a twist. While the pillory itself was common for various offenses, for thieves, it often came with an additional, very specific, and deeply symbolic accessory, the very item they had stolen. Picture the scene. The thief, perhaps still disheveled from their capture, is led to the center of the market square. There stands the pillory, a sturdy wooden frame with holes for the head and hands. Designed to hold the offender in a painfully awkward, exposed position. But this isn't just about discomfort. Attached to the pillory, or perhaps even hung around the thief's neck, is the stolen item itself. A large, stale loaf of bread, a tattered piece of fabric, or even a string of sausages. This wasn't merely about displaying the crime. It was about amplifying the shame, turning the stolen goods into an instrument of the thief's own downfall and public mockery. The very object of their desire became the symbol of their disgrace. The hours in the pillory stretched on, each minute marked by the growing discomfort and the relentless gaze of the community. Imagine the burning sensation on your neck and wrists from the rough wood, the agonizing stiffness that begins to set in, making every twitch an effort. The sun beats down, or perhaps a cold drizzle begins to fall, amplifying the misery. The sounds of the market, once vibrant and alive, now seem to mock your predicament. The cheerful haggling of merchants, the carefree laughter of children, the clatter of carts. All these ordinary sounds now serve as a stark contrast to your extraordinary, humiliating stillness. Passers-by would stop, pointing, whispering, or even throwing rotten fruit and vegetables. The stench of decay adding another layer to the indignity. The stolen loaf of bread, hanging heavy and visible, declared your crime to everyone, a silent yet powerful accusation. It served as a visual testament to your transgression, making it impossible for anyone to ignore your guilt, cementing your status as a public example of the consequences of avarice. The constant drone of insects, drawn by the rotting produce, and the occasional fly buzzing around your face, contributed further to the maddening discomfort, making the passage of time an almost unbearable agony in that wooden embrace. This particular method of punishment for theft was deeply embedded in the medieval belief that justice needed to be highly visible and immediately understood by all members of society. In a world where many could not read or write, a visual representation of the crime and its consequence was far more impactful than a written decree. It was a live demonstration, a morality play performed daily in the public square, designed to teach both the offender and the onlookers about the strict boundaries of acceptable conduct within the community. The shame associated with such an act was intended to be so profound that it would deter not only the individual from future crimes, but also serve as a stark warning to anyone else contemplating a similar act. The lingering memory of the rotten food splattered on the culprit's face, or the sight of the pilfered goods hanging as an emblem of shame, would surely outweigh any temporary gain from their illegal acquisition. The very air around the pillory seemed to hum with the silent, collective judgment of the town, an inescapable pressure bearing down on the condemned. Beyond the pillory, medieval towns employed other direct and often grim consequences for theft, especially repeat offenses or more serious forms of larceny. One such method involved mutilation, a chilling testament to the severity with which society viewed the act of taking what was not rightfully yours. For a common thief, particularly after multiple offenses, the penalty might escalate from public shaming to the loss of a hand. Imagine the stark reality of such a judgment. A hand, the very instrument of the crime, severed as a permanent, undeniable mark of guilt and a physical impossibility of repeating the offense in the same manner. This was not a punishment for the faint of heart, nor for one to easily forget. Consider the atmosphere of such an event. The townspeople, perhaps initially buzzing with gossip and anticipation, would fall into a hushed silence as the sentence was carried out. The air would thicken with a mixture of dread and morbid curiosity, the scent of fear mingling with the dust of the square. This act, brutal as it was, served multiple purposes in the medieval mind. It was immediate retribution, a clear manifestation of an eye for an eye, direct balancing of the scales of justice that resonated deeply with the common folk. It was also a powerful form of public branding, physically marking the individual as a known thief, thereby making it incredibly difficult for them to reintegrate into any honest society or to commit similar crimes again without immediate recognition. The sight of a one-handed person in a medieval town would instantly convey their past transgression, serving as a walking, living warning to others, a silent sermon against dishonesty that required no words to be understood. The intense pain, though fleeting in its most acute form, was succeeded by a lifetime of profound physical disability and an enduring social stigma, a constant and inescapable reminder of their crime. This unwavering harshness vividly reflected a society that valued property and order above almost all else, a society for which the protection of one's possessions was paramount and sacred, almost a divine right. The medieval justice system, in its rawest and most unforgiving form, sought to create indelible lessons, not merely to punish. It aimed to carve the consequences into the very flesh of the offender, ensuring that the lesson was physically manifest and universally understood, a warning etched onto the body itself for all eternity. The philosophical underpinnings of such a severe punishment were complex. It stemmed from a deep-seated belief in retributive justice, where the penalty should mirror the crime. The hand that stole would be the hand that was lost. Furthermore, it served a very practical purpose. A mutilated thief was far less capable of stealing again, providing a primitive yet effective form of crime prevention. The sheer spectacle of such a punishment also played a vital role. In an era before mass communication, these public displays were the primary means of broadcasting legal consequences, instilling fear and obedience in the populace. The distant cries, the hushed gasps of the onlookers, the slow, unsettling dripping sound that followed, all contributed to the chilling tableau of medieval justice, a stark reminder of the grave risks involved in defying the established order and the unwavering severity of its response. Our journey through the intriguing world of medieval justice now shifts focus from crimes of property to those that challenge the very fabric of public order and morality, specifically blasphemy and public disorder. In a society deeply rooted in religious dogma and communal harmony, any act that openly defied God or disrupted the peace was met with swift and often theatrical punishment, designed to restore divine favor and re-establish social equilibrium. Imagine a bustling medieval town square, usually alive with merchants, artisans, and daily life. Suddenly, a figure emerges, perhaps shouting defiant words against the heavens, or engaging in a drunken, violent brawl that spills into the public space. These acts were not merely inconveniences, they were seen as direct threats to the spiritual and social well-being of the entire community. The response was often immediate, visceral, and public, emphasizing the collective responsibility to uphold both faith and order. For the crime of blasphemy, uttering curses against God or sacred figures, the punishments were grim, reflecting the profound fear of divine retribution. One chilling method was the public gagging and whipping. Picture the offender, perhaps a man whose despair led him to curse his fate and, in doing so, blaspheme. He is seized, and a cruel iron gag, often spiked, is forced into his mouth, making speech utterly impossible. This gag was designed not just to prevent further blasphemy, but to inflict agonizing pain, effectively silencing the tongue that dared to utter forbidden words. With the gag firmly in place, the offender would then be tied to a cart or a post in the most prominent part of the town. There, a public whipping would commence. Each lash of the whip, delivered with force, was intended to purify the soul through physical suffering, to drive out the blasphemous spirit. The sound of the whip cracking in the air, the grunts of the lash-bearer, and the gasps from the onlookers would fill the silence that the gag enforced upon the victim. It was a stark lesson, both for the blasphemer and for the community, about the dire consequences of challenging divine authority. The pain was immediate and sharp, but the lasting humiliation of being utterly silenced and publicly scourged was designed to leave an even deeper mark. The gag, often fashioned with a pointed iron spike that pressed against or pierced the tongue, ensured that every involuntary movement, every attempt to speak, resulted in excruciating pain, preventing any further sacrilege. It was a tangible manifestation of the medieval belief that the tongue, being the instrument of blasphemy, must itself be punished and controlled, a grim foreshadowing of the fate that awaited those who dared to defy the divine. Beyond the physical torment, the very act of forcing silence upon the accused served to strip away their personhood in the public eye, reducing them to a mere vessel for correction, a chilling example for all to observe and internalize. The spectacle conveyed that the communal spiritual well-being far outweighed any individual's right to free expression when that expression challenged the sacred. The whip then became the instrument of public atonement. Stripped to the waist, the blasphemer's back would be laid bare to the crowd and to the lash. Each stroke was counted, perhaps by a solemn official, ensuring the full measure of the sentence was delivered. The raw, searing pain served as a physical manifestation of the spiritual torment, believed to be necessary for cleansing such a profound sin. The onlookers, from children to elders, bore witness, absorbing the lesson through their senses, the sight of the blood, the sound of the whip, the heavy silence of the victim. This communal experience reinforced the sanctity of faith and the absolute power of the church and state combined, demonstrating that even words, if deemed offensive enough, could incur the most brutal of physical responses. The image of the gagged, bleeding figure would be etched into the memory of all who saw it, a chilling and unforgettable reminder of the boundaries of speech in medieval society, a vivid tableau of fear and control intended to echo in whispers, long after the actual punishment concluded, forever associating the crime with its harsh physical cost. Transitioning from crimes of faith to those of public disturbance, we encounter the medieval response to public disorder, often fueled by excessive drinking or unruly behavior. While minor scuffles might be dealt with summarily, persistent or violent disruptions to the peace demanded a more public and inventive form of correction. One particularly notable device was the stocks. Unlike the pillory, which typically secured the head and hands, the stocks specifically immobilized the feet and sometimes the hands, leaving the offender seated on the ground in a vulnerable position. Imagine a group of drunken revelers, perhaps spilling out of a tavern, their boisterous celebration escalating into a noisy, disruptive fracas that disturbs the quiet of the evening. When caught, their punishment was not merely to be locked away, but to be held in the stocks, often placed prominently near the market cross or the town gate. There, their feet would be secured in large wooden planks, pierced with holes, ensuring they could not move. Sometimes, smaller holes would also secure their hands, forcing them into a hunched, awkward posture. Their exposed position meant they were at the mercy of the elements, the scorching sun, the biting wind, or the incessant rain, and, more significantly, at the mercy of the public. Hours in the stocks were a test of endurance. The immobility would cause legs and back to ache, then throb, then grow numb. Flies would buzz around an exposed face, and there was no way to swat them away. Children, free from the solemnity of adult concerns, would find endless amusement in the sight, pointing and laughing. Adults might add their own commentary, or even worse, hurl insults or refuse. The sheer boredom of the confinement, combined with the public exposure, made it an extremely effective form of punishment. There was no escaping the public eye, no moment of privacy. Every passing face was a reminder of one's transgression. Every whispered comment a fresh stab of humiliation. The stocks were a physical embodiment of isolation within the very heart of the community, a forced stillness that stood in stark contrast to the lively rhythm of medieval town life. The sound of footsteps passing by, the distant chatter of the town, would only amplify the feeling of being utterly stuck. A forgotten statue of shame in the midst of bustling activity, a monument to a night gone wrong, its lesson enduring through endless daylight hours. The stock served as a powerful visual deterrent against public disorder, unlike a fine, which might only affect the wealthy, or a whipping, which, once over, left only scars. The stocks inflicted a prolonged period of public ignominy that was accessible to all classes. It was a low-cost, high-impact method of maintaining order, relying heavily on the power of shame and the collective judgment of the community. The offender was left to literally stew in their public disgrace, a living monument to the consequences of disturbing the king's peace or upsetting the moral sensibilities of their neighbors. The simple, robust design of the stocks allowed them to be erected quickly in any suitable public space, making them a ubiquitous symbol of local justice. The message was clear. Your disruption would be met with your own discomfort and the unyielding scrutiny of everyone around you. It was a constant reminder that the peace of the community outweighed any individual's desire for unbridled revelry. In some cases, light offenses might even be punished by a short stint in the stocks without further physical harm, proving the power of public shame alone an effective tool in a precarceral society that valued communal order above all else. The creaking of the wooden planks, the echoes of distant market sounds, and the unyielding weight on the ankles combined to make the experience deeply, unforgettably miserable. Our journey through the medieval justice system now brings us to a darker, more insidious realm, focusing on crimes that threaten the core trust and moral fabric of the community: fraud and deception, particularly those committed by millers and bakers. In medieval society, where food was a precious commodity and honesty in trade paramount for survival, swindling people out of their sustenance was met with unique and often grim forms of public exposure and punishment. Such acts were not just seen as personal failings, but as offenses against the collective well-being, demanding a very visible form of redress that restored the communal faith in the market and in the integrity of basic necessities. Imagine the daily life of a medieval town where the baker provided the essential bread, the staff of life, and the miller ground the grain into flour. Trust in these figures was absolute. Their integrity was as crucial as the freshness of the air. Yet temptation often led to deceit. A baker might add sawdust, chalk, or even inferior grains to the flour to make loaves seem larger or heavier, cheating customers out of their rightful purchase, often at the expense of their meager budgets. Meanwhile, a miller might secretly keep a larger portion of the grain brought to them for grinding than was legally allowed, a practice known as taking too much toll, thereby enriching themselves unfairly from the labor and trust of others. These were not abstract crimes. They directly impacted the sustenance of every household, from the poorest peasant to the wealthiest lord, affecting the very survival of families and undermining the fragile economic stability of the entire community. Such acts of fraud were seen as a profound betrayal of communal trust, a direct attack on the integrity of the food supply. And thus they warranted punishments designed not only to publicly shame, but also to deter any who might consider similar transgressions in the future. The very existence of the town depended on the honest provision of these staples, making any deviation a serious matter. For the dishonest baker or miller, one of the most common and creatively humiliating punishments was the tumbrel, also known as the baker's pillory, or, in some regions, a specialized cucking stool for bakers. While sharing conceptual similarities with the general cucking stool we discussed earlier, the tumbrel had its own distinct, often more permanent, method of public disgrace. This device was essentially a cart or a long beam, typically with two wheels, to which the offender was securely fastened. The key distinction was its mobile purpose: to parade the dishonest merchant through the very streets and market squares they had defrauded, displaying their shame for all to see, ensuring maximum exposure to those they had wronged, and allowing a full and public reckoning. Picture the scene unfolding in the busy marketplace. A baker, perhaps caught selling underweight loaves, or a miller found to have stolen grain, is roughly tied to the tumbrel. Around his neck, for all to view and recognize, hangs a collection of his own shoddy, underweight bread, or maybe the actual scales he notoriously used to cheat his customers. Sometimes even the very bad grain he had mixed in with the good. The tumbrel drawn by a scrawny horse, or even pulled by the grim figure of the town's executioner, would slowly proceed through the main thoroughfares, a deliberate and agonizing crawl, ensuring every single person had ample time to witness the disgrace. Every turn of the crude wooden wheel, every creak of the cart's protesting frame, was a public announcement of his deceit, echoing through the busy streets. The crowds would gather quickly, their initial curiosity rapidly turning to simmering anger and open scorn. They would jeer, shout accusations, and often, without hesitation, throw rotten fruit, mud, or even horse dung. The very substances symbolizing the impurities or worthlessness of the goods the baker had sold. The foul stench of the thrown refuse would cling to the baker, adding a sensory layer of revulsion to his already profound humiliation. The baker's face, covered in dirt, refuse, and deep shame, would be exposed to the relentless, unforgiving gaze of his former customers. Now his most vocal accusers, their faces a mixture of betrayal and grim satisfaction. This was a direct, inescapable confrontation with the community he had betrayed. A visual sermon on the immediate and public consequences of commercial dishonesty. The rising crescendo of their scorn, a symphony of disapproval, would echo in his ears. A far more piercing and lasting torment than any mere physical blow. A sound that would haunt his sleep for years to come. The tumbrel's design often allowed the beam to pivot, enabling the baker or miller to be occasionally swung, or even dropped into a muddy ditch or pond, mimicking the immersion of the cucking stool, but specifically tailored for commercial rather than moral offenses. This additional element dramatically amplified the indignity, ensuring the offender was not just seen, but thoroughly drenched in their public shame, literally cleansed of their deceit in the foul water. The cold, foul water, combined with the relentless jeers and the physical discomfort of being submerged in filth, created an overwhelming sensory assault designed to utterly break the spirit and permanently mark the individual as untrustworthy in the eyes of everyone they knew. It was a punishment that aimed to strip away every shred of professional credibility and social standing, ensuring that no honest person would ever again buy from or trust such a merchant, effectively ending their livelihood and exiling them from honest trade. The lingering memory of the dripping, humiliated figure, perhaps covered in mud and refuse, would long outlive the actual duration of the ride, serving as a powerful, lingering warning to others who might consider engaging in fraudulent trade. A stark reminder that the market's integrity was fiercely guarded, not just by law, but by the collective will of the people. The very air seemed to vibrate with the collective outrage of a community whose fundamental trust had been violated by those they relied upon for their daily sustenance and economic stability. Beyond the specific disgrace of the tumbrel, other forms of direct, visible justice were applied to maintain commercial honesty. For particularly egregious or repeated acts of fraud, the medieval response could be even more direct and irreversible. The cutting off of an ear was a punishment often reserved for merchants. usurers, or those consistently found guilty of deceitful practices, signifying a loss of trust as severe as the crime itself, a permanent mark of disgrace. This was not a punishment to be hidden. It was a permanent, visible mark etched onto the body of the offender, serving as a lifelong scarlet letter of their dishonesty. A mark impossible to conceal and instantly recognizable. Imagine the sharp, sudden pain as the blade performed its grim work, followed by the warm, alarming rush of blood. The ear, once a simple part of the body, was now gone, leaving a stark, undeniable void. A gaping absence that perpetually declared the past transgression for all who observed it. This mutilation, much like the loss of a hand for theft, was deeply symbolic. The ear, being the organ that hears the complaints of the customer and the promises of honest trade, was removed as a physical testament to the offender's failure to listen to the dictates of integrity and fairness, to the voice of their own conscience and the community. The wound, once healed, would forever mark the individual. There would be no hiding their past, no escaping the knowing glances or whispered judgments in every town or market they visited across the land, their reputation preceding them like a dark shadow. This served a profound practical purpose too. A marked merchant would struggle immensely to find trust and customers in any market, effectively ending their career in commerce and forcing them into a life of ostracism and marginality, perhaps even beggary. This form of punishment reflected a society that had a profound reliance on direct, personal trust in commercial dealings, lacking the complex legal frameworks and extensive regulatory bodies of modern times. The severity of the penalty underscored the immense importance placed on honest weights, true measures, and fair dealings in a pre-industrial economy, where every transaction was a personal exchange of trust. It was a clear, unambiguous message. The community would protect its vital economic integrity by physically branding those who sought to undermine it, ensuring that no one could escape the consequences of their dishonesty. The sight of an earless man in the market was a chilling, unforgettable warning to any merchant contemplating deceit. A stark reminder that the community's trust, once broken, would exact a brutal and permanent toll, a visible scar worn for life, a testament to a broken bond. The medieval street, therefore, became a powerful stage for morality plays, with these severe punishments acting as grim lessons, ensuring that the rules of commerce, like the rules of faith and order, were understood and enforced with unwavering severity and public visibility, echoing through the collective memory for generations. Our exploration of medieval justice now descends into a realm where the lines between crime, faith, and the supernatural blurred, focusing on offenses that challenged not just human law, but divine order itself, witchcraft and heresy. In a society profoundly shaped by religious belief, any perceived deviation from orthodox faith or suspicion of dark, unholy practices was met with a terrifyingly unique form of judgment, often involving the direct intervention of God himself, or so it was believed. These were not mere legal proceedings. They were spiritual battles, and the consequences were dire. Designed to cleanse the community of perceived evil and reassert celestial authority over earthly transgressions. Imagine a medieval community, bound tightly by shared faith and a deep-seated fear of the unknown. Life was precarious, harvests uncertain, and disease rampant. When a crop failed, livestock sickened, or a child fell ill without clear explanation, suspicion could easily turn to a neighbor, an outcast, or anyone seen as different, someone on the margins, perhaps, whose unusual habits were misinterpreted through a lens of fear. Whispers of curses, pacts with malevolent spirits, or secret rituals would spread like wildfire through the closely knit villages. The church, wielding immense spiritual and temporal authority, often took the lead in these matters, as heresy was seen as a contamination of the soul. a rebellion against divine truth and witchcraft, a direct affront to God's benevolent will, a perversion of natural order. The traditional methods of evidence, gathering witness, testimony, or physical proof were often deemed utterly insufficient for such grave, otherworldly crimes, which defied earthly logic. Instead, medieval justice frequently turned to the dramatic and terrifying process of trial by ordeal. Trial by ordeal was not a punishment in itself, but rather a method of determining guilt or innocence when human evidence was lacking or disputed, particularly in cases where the truth was believed to be hidden from mortal eyes. The core principle was simple, yet profound. God would intervene directly to reveal the truth, making his judgment manifest for all to see. The accused would undergo a dangerous or painfully physical test, and their outcome, whether they survived, how a wound healed, or how they behaved under duress, would be interpreted as the definitive divine judgment. It was a terrifying gamble with one's life and eternal soul, enacted before the entire community, transforming a legal proceeding into a profound religious spectacle. This deeply ingrained belief reflected a profound trust in divine providence, even when confronted with horrifying methods and ambiguous results. It was thought that God, in his infinite wisdom, would never allow an innocent person to suffer condemnation in such a trial. One of the most infamous forms, particularly associated with accusations of witchcraft, and sometimes used in cases of murder, was trial by water, often referred to as the ordeal of cold water. Picture the accused, usually a woman, her face pale with terror and exhaustion, led to the nearest body of water, a deep river, a murky pond, or even a specially prepared pool within the town limits. She would be stripped, often bound with ropes, her right thumb tied to her left big toe and her left thumb to her right big toe, a binding intended to prevent any hidden magical aid that might allow her to manipulate the water. The local priest would perform a solemn blessing over the water, invoking God to accept the innocent into its pure depths and reject anything impure or evil, causing it to float. The belief was that pure water, being a divine element and an agent of God's will, would reject anything impure or evil, like a witch or a heretic. The moment of truth arrived as she was slowly, or sometimes abruptly and unceremoniously, lowered into the cold, dark water. The crowd watched in hushed anticipation, their breaths held tight, a collective tension hanging in the air. If she sank, fully submerging and staying beneath the surface, it was believed the pure water had accepted her, thereby proving her innocence, for it had not rejected her. She would then be pulled out, often barely alive and shivering uncontrollably, but cleared of the accusation. However, if she floated even slightly, resisting the water's embrace, it was interpreted as the water rejecting her purity, thus proving her guilt. This outcome, though offering a chance of survival from immediate drowning, meant condemnation, often leading to far more brutal punishments like burning at the stake as a convicted witch or heretic. The psychological terror of knowing that both outcomes carried immense and terrifying risk, and that the judgment rested on the subjective interpretation of a medieval belief system, must have been overwhelming. The chilling cold of the water, the suffocating pressure, the desperate fight for breath, and the paralyzing fear, all culminating in a verdict delivered not by man, but by the very elements themselves, acting as God's instruments. The fear of being rejected by an element of nature must have been profound, a primal terror that transcended physical discomfort. Another harrowing form of divine judgment was trial by fire, typically reserved for more serious accusations like grand larceny, perjury, or to clear high-ranking individuals whose honor was at stake in the absence of definitive proof. This ordeal involved the handling of intensely hot metal. Imagine the accused, perhaps a man of noble birth, accused of treason. his hands trembling visibly before the gathered assembly. Before him, a piece of iron, perhaps a plowshare or a heavy ring, glows incandescently, having been heated in a roaring fire until it was bright orange. A solemn prayer would be recited by a priest, beseeching God to make the iron harmless if the accused was innocent, or to burn them profoundly if guilty, revealing his divine will through the flesh. The accused would then be made to grasp the searing hot iron and carry it a prescribed distance, perhaps 3 paces, perhaps 9, over consecrated ground, usually within the confines of a church or its yard. Every agonizing step would be witnessed by a hushed, terrified crowd, their eyes fixated on the glowing metal and the condemned hands. Once the distance was covered, the iron would be dropped, and the hands would be immediately bandaged and carefully sealed by a priest, often with wax or clay, not to be touched or inspected for 3 days. The verdict hinged entirely on the healing process. After 3 days, the bandages would be removed in a public ceremony, a tense moment of revelation. If the wounds had begun to heal cleanly, showing signs of recovery and purity, it was declared a divine sign of innocence. The accused would be absolved, their honor restored. However, if the burns remained raw, festering, showed no signs of healing, or had worsened, it was seen as irrefutable proof of guilt, God's unmistakable condemnation written upon the flesh. This physical ordeal was excruciatingly painful, and even for the innocent. Recovery was a prolonged and agonizing process, often leaving permanent, disfiguring scars as a lifelong reminder of the ordeal they endured. The agony of the burning flesh, the acrid smell of singed skin filling the air, the searing heat that seemed to penetrate to the very bone. These were sensations designed to extract truth directly from the accused, with divine blessing and a profound physical cost. The very air around the glowing iron would shimmer with the heat, creating a terrifying, almost mystical aura around the ordeal itself, a palpable sense of the divine presence determining fate. Both trial by water and trial by fire, along with other lesser-known ordeals like trial by bread and cheese, were eventually outlawed by the Church in the 13th century, specifically by the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215. Largely due to growing skepticism among theologians and legal scholars about their accuracy and the recognition of their inherent cruelty and potential for manipulation. However, their legacy as a testament to the medieval mind's understanding of justice, divinity, and human accountability remained profound. They highlight a period where the legal system was deeply intertwined with faith, where the ultimate judge was believed to be God himself, and where the most peculiar and terrifying spectacles served as grim, but essential rituals for maintaining order and addressing the deepest fears and anxieties of the community. These ordeals, while horrifying to contemplate today, were, in their time, seen as legitimate pathways to truth, their outcomes accepted as the irrefutable will of the Almighty, shaping lives and destinies with an unyielding finality. The memory of these trials, with their blend of raw human fear and unwavering divine belief, continues to echo through the corridors of history, a unique chapter in the story of justice. Our journey through the labyrinthine corridors of medieval justice now leads us into the chilling silence of forced confinement and the agonizing restraint of speech, exploring punishments designed not only to punish the body, but also to utterly break the spirit. We turn our attention to the grim reality of medieval dungeons and prisons, often serving as a punishment in themselves, and the peculiar device known as the scold's bridle, a stark tool for enforcing verbal conformity. These forms of justice addressed crimes that required prolonged isolation or the severe suppression of what was deemed unruly speech, highlighting a society deeply concerned with control and order, even over an individual's very voice and thoughts. Imagine the stark reality of medieval imprisonment. unlike modern penitentiaries, which aim for rehabilitation or fixed sentences. Medieval prisons or dungeons were often places of indefinite detention, their very conditions a form of punishment. These were not just holding cells. They were instruments of slow torture, designed to slowly wear down the condemned through relentless deprivation and profound despair. Picture yourself in such a place. A cold, damp stone chamber, often deep underground, where sunlight never penetrates, and the only connection to the outside world is a distant, often barred, opening high above. The air is thick with the pervasive scent of mildew, human waste, and unwashed bodies, a suffocating combination that clings to every surface. There's an unnerving silence, broken only by the rhythmic drip of water from the unseen ceiling, the distant, unsettling creak of a rat, or perhaps the muffled, indistinguishable groans of another unseen prisoner echoing from a neighboring cell. The conditions were deliberately, calculatedly harsh. Prisoners were often kept in absolute darkness for days, weeks, or even months, disorienting them completely and stripping away their fundamental sense of time and reality. Food, if provided at all, was meager and often putrid, barely enough to sustain life, sometimes infested with maggots. Water was scarce and contaminated, a constant source of thirst and disease. Vermin scurried freely in the shadows, sharing the confined space, and disease was an ever-present, insidious companion, quickly spreading through the cramped, unsanitary cells, a silent killer often more effective than any executioner. Some prisoners were kept in heavy iron chains, perpetually shackled, their limbs slowly wasting away from disuse and the constant chafing of metal on skin. Others might find themselves in oubliettes, literally meaning forgotten places, deep bottle-shaped pits, accessible only through a small opening at the top where hope. Light, fresh air, and human contact were almost entirely absent, leaving one to rot in darkness and isolation. The psychological toll of such confinement was immense and devastating. The crushing loneliness, the unending dread of an unknown future, the gradual erosion of sanity in a world devoid of warmth, light, or any meaningful human interaction. The rough, unforgiving stone walls seemed to press in, mirroring the profound despair that enveloped the soul, squeezing out all hope. The chilling cold seeped into the very bones, a constant, gnawing reminder of the world beyond, a world that had seemingly forgotten them entirely. This prolonged confinement served multiple grim purposes. For serious offenses like treason, rebellion, or high-level political threats. It was often a prelude to a more severe, ultimate punishment designed to weaken physical resistance. Extract confessions through psychological torment, or simply to ensure the condemned wasted away before reaching the scaffold. For others, it was the punishment itself, a slow death by attrition, or a permanent, ignominious removal from society without the messiness of a public execution. The lack of formal judicial oversight and rudimentary record-keeping meant that many prisoners simply vanished, their fate decided by the arbitrary whims of their captors, lost to history within the cold stone walls. The faint metallic sound of a key turning in a distant lock, the barely audible echo of footsteps on stone, became the only connection to the outside world. Each sound a tormenting reminder of lost freedom and a life that continued without them. The isolation was so profound that many would speak to themselves, their own voices becoming their only companions in the suffocating darkness. A desperate, often futile, clinging to sanity in the face of utter oblivion. The medieval dungeon, therefore, was not merely a building. It was a stark, living monument to forgotten lives, a place where time ceased to matter, and where the human spirit was systematically dismantled, brick by agonizing brick, until nothing remained but a shadow. Transitioning from the silent torment of the dungeon, we now consider a form of punishment that specifically targeted the very instrument of communication and social interaction, the human voice. This leads us to the infamous scold's bridle, also known as the brank in some regions. This device was specifically used to punish and humiliate individuals, predominantly women, accused of gossiping, nagging, slandering, quarreling, or otherwise being too verbally contentious or outspoken in a way that disrupted public order. It was a physical manifestation of society's pervasive desire to control perceived unruly female speech and maintain public decorum, often reflecting deeply ingrained patriarchal norms. Picture the design of this grim contraption. It was an iron muzzle or a cage-like mask, meticulously crafted to fit tightly over the entire head. Attached to the mask and extending into the mouth was a metal plate or bit, often spiked, roughened, or sharply pointed, which rested on or pressed down firmly upon the tongue. Any attempt to speak, to move the tongue, or even to swallow would result in agonizing pain, effectively rendering the wearer entirely mute and incapable of any verbal retort. This ensured silence, but at a horrifying cost to the individual's dignity and physical comfort. With the bridle clamped firmly and cruelly onto her head, the unfortunate individual would then be led through the streets, often chained to a public post near the market cross, or paraded through the marketplace like an animal on a leash. The metallic clanking of the iron, the visible discomfort and distress of the wearer, and her utter inability to respond to the jeers, insults, and even thrown refuse of the crowd made for a deeply humiliating and unforgettable spectacle. The purpose of the scold's bridle was multifaceted. It was a brutal physical deterrent against verbal transgressions, making the very act of speaking excruciatingly painful. But its greater power lay in the public humiliation it inflicted. The wearer was made into a living, silent spectacle, a breathing, clanking symbol of unruly speech brought to heel, a stark warning to all other women. They couldn't defend themselves, couldn't retort to their tormentors, couldn't even complain about their agonizing discomfort. Their very silence, enforced by pain, became the loudest declaration of their supposed guilt and subsequent subjugation to societal norms. Children, innocent in their cruelty, might point and giggle. Neighbors might gather, some with righteous indignation, others with grim satisfaction, while the more compassionate simply averted their gaze. The unrelenting physical pressure on the tongue, the metallic taste of cold iron in the mouth, and the muffled, distorted world outside the rigid mask combined to create a profound sensory and psychological ordeal. The weight of the iron itself, often heavy and cumbersome, added to the physical burden, causing neck strain, headaches, and constant throbbing discomfort. The duration of wear could range from a few hours to an entire day, or even longer, depending on the severity of the perceived offense and the local custom. The scold's bridle vividly demonstrates the medieval emphasis on social control and absolute conformity, particularly regarding public behavior and acceptable speech. It was a low-cost, visually striking, and intensely public method of correcting behavior that, while not physically scarring in the long term, left an indelible mark of shame on the individual's reputation and psychological well-being. The public nature of the punishment meant that the lesson was not just for the wearer, but for everyone who witnessed it, a clear warning about the current consequences of straying from societal expectations of proper conduct, especially for women in a patriarchal society where their voices were often curtailed. The memory of a woman silenced and shamed, her face encased in iron, paraded through the familiar streets, would linger, serving as a powerful, unspoken reminder of the dangers of an untamed tongue. These were the grim yet peculiar instruments of justice in an age that believed absolute control, whether of the body or the voice, is paramount to maintaining social and moral order and age or public disgrace. served as a constant, palpable force in daily life. Our profound journey through the intricate layers of medieval justice now culminates in the ultimate expressions of law and order, reserved for crimes that shattered the very foundations of society and faith. Capital punishment. These were the final, irrevocable judgments often carried out with grim theatricality, designed not merely to end a life, but to send an unequivocal, terrifying message to all who witnessed it, ensuring that the memory of transgression and its consequence would endure long after the condemned was silenced, echoing through generations. Imagine the absolute finality of justice in an age where the state's power was absolute, and life, though precious, could be swiftly extinguished for transgressions deemed unforgivable. Crimes like high treason, grave murder, open rebellion against a lord or king, or persistent, unrepentant heresy often led directly to the scaffold or the stake. These punishments were never hidden behind prison walls. They were meticulously planned public spectacles, carefully orchestrated to instill both profound fear and a renewed sense of collective morality within the populace. The ultimate aim was to purify the community by ruthlessly removing the offending element and to deter others through stark, unforgettable example that was impossible to ignore. One chilling and enduring symbol of ultimate medieval justice was the gibbet. While often associated with the act of hanging itself, the gibbet specifically refers to the gallows-like structure used for the prolonged public display of the executed body, sometimes even of a living person condemned to a slow, agonizing death by exposure, a punishment known as hanging in chains. Imagine such a sight, usually located outside the town walls, strategically placed at a crossroads or on a prominent hill visible from a great distance. Stood this stark, skeletal structure, often resembling a large, dark crucifix against the skyline. From its crossbeam hung a body, sometimes encased in an iron cage. A metal skeleton within a metal frame, preventing scavengers and ensuring the body remained intact and visible for as long as possible, a gruesome monument. Picture the scene. A serious criminal, perhaps a notorious murderer, a dangerous rebel, or a highwayman who had terrorized the local roads and trade routes, would be condemned. After the initial act of execution, the body, rather than being granted the dignity of burial, would be hoisted onto the gibbet. The purpose of this prolonged display was not just to punish, but to continue to punish, even beyond death, and to serve as a perpetual, grim warning that spanned seasons and years. Day after day, week after week, sometimes even for months or several years, the body would remain exposed to the relentless elements. The biting winter winds that rattled the chains, the scorching summer sun that baked the flesh, the incessant, chilling rain that washed over the decaying form. It would slowly decay, becoming a stark, macabre spectacle of justice served. A horrifying tableau of human mortality and state power. The iron cage, often custom-made to fit the individual, was designed specifically to keep the corpse from falling apart too quickly, ensuring that the chilling silhouette remained a recognizable, terrifying presence against the horizon. Birds of prey might circle overhead, their screeching calls adding to the desolate atmosphere, a morbid testament to the body's final, ignominious fate. The psychological impact on those passing by, on weary travelers approaching the town, or on the villagers themselves, was profound and inescapable. It was a constant, visual sermon on the dire consequences of crime. A silent yet powerfully eloquent declaration of the absolute authority of the law, etched into the very landscape and the collective unconscious. The smell, depending on the direction of the wind, might even carry down into the town, an invisible extension of the warning, a sickening reminder of the fate that awaited lawbreakers. The creaking of the chains in the wind, a mournful, spectral sound, added to the terrifying atmosphere. an auditory reminder of the violent death that had taken place there and the profound fear it was meant to evoke. Travelers would avert their gaze, mothers would instinctively shield their children's eyes, but the gruesome message, grim and undeniably clear, seeped into the collective consciousness, a silent testament to the unforgiving nature of medieval law and the long reach of its power. Beyond the lingering specter of the gibbet, another, more immediate and horrifying form of capital punishment, often imbued with deep spiritual significance, was burning at the stake. This method was almost exclusively reserved for crimes considered not just against human law, but against God himself, most notably heresy, the ultimate spiritual rebellion, and witchcraft, a perceived pact with dark forces. In some extreme cases, it was also used for particularly heinous forms of treason, where the accused was deemed utterly beyond redemption and deserving of complete annihilation, body and soul, to cleanse the earth of their presence. Imagine the somber gathering, a large, hushed crowd assembled in the central square or just outside the town, drawn by an irresistible mixture of fear, morbid curiosity, and a grim sense of collective righteousness, believing they were witnessing God's will. In the center, a tall, sturdy wooden stake stands erect, surrounded by a carefully constructed pyre of dry faggots and timber, piled high and ready. The air is thick with anticipation, a heavy, almost suffocating silence punctuated only by hushed whispers. The distant murmur of prayers from the clergy and the rhythmic beating of a drum. The condemned, often clad in a simple, coarse shift, is led forward, their face perhaps displaying a final, defiant resignation, an empty terror, or a desperate plea for mercy that would go unheard. This was not merely an execution. It was a deeply ritualistic act, a purification through fire, designed to cleanse the community of the perceived evil and to send the soul by literal consumption of the body to its ultimate, unappealable judgment. The sharp, eager crackling of the kindling as it was lit followed by the roaring crescendo of the flames engulfing the wood, and the rising plumes of dense, acrid smoke would fill the senses, marking the dreadful, inescapable progression of the event. The symbolism of fire was paramount in the medieval mind. Fire was seen as an elemental agent of both purification and absolute destruction, capable of consuming sin and eradicating the unholy, leaving nothing behind. For heretics, it was believed to burn away the corruption of false doctrine, preventing their tainted beliefs from spreading like a spiritual plague. For witches, it was meant to utterly destroy the physical vessel that had been used for malevolent practices, theoretically severing any unholy pacts and releasing the community from their evil influence. The public nature of the burning underscored the community's absolute rejection of the crime and its perpetrator, a communal expulsion by fire. The flames, rising higher and higher, created a terrifying, awe-inspiring spectacle against the sky, turning the condemned into a mere silhouette against the fiery backdrop, their individual identity consumed by the inferno. The heat would become intense, pushing back the edges of the crowd, who could still feel its searing presence on their skin, a testament to the fire's destructive power. The acrid smell of burning wood, and later, other unbearable scents, would fill the air, leaving an unforgettable, sickening impression that would linger in the nostrils and memory for days. This was the ultimate erasure, a complete, violent destruction of the body, leaving nothing but ashes behind, meant to leave no physical trace of the condemned on earth. The process was deliberately slow, agonizing, and purposefully public, ensuring maximum impact. The crowd would watch, some with fervent, unwavering belief in the divine justice being meted out, their faces stern and unforgiving. Others, however, would watch with a mixture of raw horror and profound pity, their minds grappling with the terrible spectacle before them. The sheer scale of the inferno, the sounds of the fire roaring and consuming, and the ultimate reduction of a human form to ash, delivered a chilling lesson about the absolute power of both divine wrath and earthly law. This form of capital punishment served as a terrifying, indelible deterrent, vividly demonstrating the ultimate price of defying God or the established social and spiritual order. It was a final, purifying act, designed to cleanse the community and to secure its spiritual and temporal well-being through overwhelming fear and devastating spectacle. The lingering heat radiating from the scorched earth, the persistent scent of smoke in the air, and the memory of the rising, consuming flames would remain long after the crowd dispersed, a stark final testament to the unforgiving nature of medieval justice. A warning woven inextricably into the very fabric of the communal memory and whispered in hushed tones for generations. Our extensive journey through the peculiar and often brutal world of medieval justice now shifts its focus to some of the more subtle, yet equally potent forms of control, those targeting not just the body, but the very essence of a person's reputation and social standing. In an era where one's place in the community was paramount, crimes involving defamation of character and the intricate, faith-bound process of trial by compurgation reveal how trust, truth, and communal bonds were woven into the very fabric of justice, shaping individual destinies in profound ways and often leaving invisible scars that lasted a lifetime. Imagine a medieval community where whispers could ruin a life as effectively as a sword. Spreading false rumors, outright lying under oath in court, or publicly slandering a neighbor were not mere social faux pas. They were considered profoundly serious offenses that could destabilize the delicate balance of trust essential for daily life and commerce. Unlike the tangible damages of theft or the immediate threat of violence, these were crimes that attacked the invisible yet vital asset of a person's good name and honor, the bedrock of their existence in a tight-knit society. Such actions were seen as a direct betrayal of communal solidarity, eroding the very foundations of social cohesion. And the punishments devised for them often aimed to restore moral order by publicly exposing the deception and reaffirming the value of truth and honest communication. The damage done by a malicious tongue was invisible, but could be devastating and long-lasting, destroying livelihoods and reputations with a single ill-spoken word. For those caught in the act of perjury or slander, medieval justice sometimes employed symbolic punishments directly targeting the very instrument of their offense, the tongue and the mouth, while mercifully avoiding permanent physical mutilation in many cases. These methods aim to shame and effectively silence the offending speaker in a deeply humiliating manner. Picture a bustling market square, alive with the sounds of merchants hawking their wares and villagers bartering for goods. A man, perhaps a serial liar or a perjurer caught in his deceit, is led to a prominent spot made to stand on a small platform or in a set of stocks that elevates him above the crowd, making him an inescapable focus of public attention. There, a specialized device might be employed, not the full scold's bridle, but a more localized instrument designed specifically to cause discomfort and prevent speech. This could involve a heavy, clumsy gag, perhaps made of wood or iron, inserted into the mouth. Its purpose was not merely to silence, but to make any attempt at vocalization painful, distorted, and ridiculous, drawing mocking attention and further public scorn. Or in some particularly creative and utterly repulsive instances, a bitter, foul-tasting substance, sometimes even animal waste, might be forced into the mouth, inducing uncontrollable public retching, transforming the act of deceit into a physically repulsive and deeply humiliating spectacle. The acrid taste, the burning sensation in the throat, and the unavoidable physical reaction served as immediate, visceral reminders of their transgression, etching the experience into their memory and the memory of the onlookers, a public lesson in the sanctity of truth. These punishments sought to metaphorically cleanse the dishonest tongue, marking the individual as utterly unreliable and untrustworthy in the eyes of everyone present, forever tainting their future words with suspicion. The low murmurs from the crowd, the averted gazes of former acquaintances, and the sheer helplessness in the face of such profound public scorn would etch a far deeper and more lasting mark than any transient physical discomfort, forever tainting their words with suspicion and their presence with distrust, making it difficult to ever fully regain their standing. Beyond these direct acts of shame, there existed a fascinating and often misunderstood form of judicial process known as compurgation or wager of law. This was less a punishment and more a fundamental method of proving innocence, particularly for crimes where direct evidence was scarce or conflicting, and the accusation rested heavily on reputation and circumstantial evidence. A common scenario in communities without formal policing or forensic methods. It was a profound testament to the medieval belief that God's truth could be manifested not through physical torment, but through the collective moral integrity and shared faith of a community. Unlike the fiery ordeals of hot iron or the chilling ordeal of cold water we explored earlier, compurgation didn't rely on physical suffering to reveal divine will, but on the profound social capital and unblemished character of the accused and their supporters, demonstrating the intertwined nature of faith and community trust. Imagine a villager accused of a minor theft, perhaps a stolen chicken or a few measures of grain, or an infraction against a local custom for which solid proof is elusive and witnesses are divided. To clear their name and restore their standing, they might be granted the right of compurgation. This meant the accused would formally swear a solemn oath of innocence before a judge or a high church official, invoking God as their witness, pledging their very soul on their truthfulness. However, this oath alone was insufficient to satisfy the court or the community. To lend irrefutable weight to their sworn word, the accused then had to gather a specific number of compurgators, or oath helpers, typically 12, reflecting the number of apostles or a full jury, though the exact number could vary by region and crime. These individuals were not witnesses to the crime itself. Rather, they were respected members of the community, known for their honesty and piety, who would stand beside the accused and swear an oath that they believed the accused-esque oath of innocence to be true and truthful. Their oath was not about direct factual knowledge, but about the trustworthiness of the accused character and their own belief in that character. Picture the tense scene within the hallowed quiet of a local church, or the solemn atmosphere of a court gathering in the town hall. The accused, standing before the gathered assembly, pronounces their oath with a firm voice, claiming innocence before God, their very soul at stake. Then, one by one, their chosen compurgators step forward. Each, in turn, would solemnly swear that the accused oath was clean and unperjured, risking their own spiritual salvation by endorsing a falsehood. The entire process was fraught with immense tension and spiritual peril. Any stumble, any hesitation, any mispronunciation of the exact, precise wording of the oath by either the accused or any of their compurgators would instantly invalidate the entire proceeding, leading to an automatic verdict of guilt for the accused, as it would be interpreted as a clear sign of divine disapproval and a failure of collective integrity. This made finding compurgators a true test of one's standing, reputation, and moral credit within the community, a testament to how deeply interwoven individual fate was with collective perception. Not just anyone could be a compurgator. They had to be men and occasionally women of good repute, unblemished by scandal or past perjuries, and known universally for their honesty and sound judgment. Their willingness to risk their own souls and public reputations by swearing such a binding oath spoke volumes about their deep-seated belief in the accused's integrity and innocence, a powerful testament to communal trust. This reliance on communal oaths highlights the profound interconnectedness and social fabric of medieval life. If an individual could not muster enough trustworthy compurgators, or if their chosen oath helpers were themselves deemed unreliable, or of questionable character by the court or the wider community, the accused was immediately considered guilty, having failed to prove their innocence through the accepted divine and social means. This often led to social ostracism, financial penalties, or even further physical punishment, depending on the severity of the original crime. Compurgation, while seemingly less brutal than an ordeal of fire or water, was a deeply psychological and social trial. It placed immense pressure on the individual to live a life of unwavering integrity, maintain a pristine good name, and cultivate strong, reliable social ties, demonstrating that in medieval society, your reputation and the unwavering faith others placed in you held the very key to your freedom and your ultimate fate. The hushed reverence of the oath, the collective discerning gaze of the community, and the fragile nature of a single misspoken word underscore a time when justice was not just about tangible evidence, but about belief standing and the invisible yet unbreakable bonds of trust that held society together, shaping every aspect of a person's existence. Our long and winding journey through the peculiar landscape of medieval justice now reaches its quiet conclusion. We have traversed a world where law was often brutal, deeply intertwined with faith, and always profoundly public. As we step back from the pillories, the gibbets, and the solemn ordeals, let us reflect on the enduring legacy of these practices and the broader tapestry of life they represented, recognizing how they shaped communities and individual destinies in a bygone era, leaving an undeniable imprint on the very soul of the medieval period, echoing through time to influence even our modern understanding of law and order, however distant they may seem. The whispers of these past times still carry lessons for the attentive ear, reminding us of the enduring human struggle for balance between order and individual liberty. The medieval justice system, with all its inherent harshness and seemingly archaic methods, was a direct and unavoidable reflection of its time, born from the very necessities and limitations of that age. It was an era profoundly lacking in many of the institutional pillars we take for granted today. There were no organized police forces as we know them. No widespread literacy made complex written laws universally accessible to the common person, and certainly no sophisticated forensic science to pinpoint guilt with precision. Instead, justice relied on immediate observation, communal consensus, and often divine intervention. Believing God would reveal the truth. Trust was primarily local, intensely communal, and deeply personal, built upon face-to-face interactions within tightly knit villages and towns where everyone knew or thought they knew everyone else. And reputation was a currency as valuable as coin, meticulously guarded and fiercely defended. Therefore, punishments were meticulously designed to be highly visible, unforgettable, and often physically painful, serving as stark object lessons for a largely illiterate populace, who learned not from books or abstract legal codes, but from direct, palpable, and often terrifying experience. The public square, frequently transformed into the solemn courtroom, the bustling marketplace, became the dramatic stage for judgment, and the very body of the condemned, whether merely shamed or utterly broken, served as a living, breathing testament to the severe consequences of defying God or king. Every crack of a lash against flesh, every agonizing public display of an offender, bound and exposed, every disorienting dip of the cucking stool into foul, stagnant water was a sermon delivered not in abstract theological words, but in raw, visceral, and unforgettable experience understood by all, from the youngest child with wide, fearful eyes to the oldest elder, nodding in grim recognition of the rules being enforced and the order maintained. The ultimate aim was not rehabilitation as we understand it today, nor a system of incarceration designed for reform, but immediate deterrence for both the offender and the myriad onlookers, swift retribution that satisfied the wronged and reinforced social boundaries, and the urgent restoration of a perceived divine and social order that had been disturbed. The very act of watching these punishments unfold was a profound, if grim, form of civic education, teaching what was acceptable and what was forbidden, reinforcing societal norms with every visible agony endured and every collective gasp from the crowd. The sheer terror and the moral clarity of these public displays left an imprint that transcended individual memory, becoming a part of the communal folklore and cautionary tales whispered by the fireside for generations. Consider how profoundly different this world was from our own, separated by centuries of legal evolution, scientific advancement, and fundamentally changing societal values. In medieval society, the community was often both prosecutor and jury, its collective outrage or shared belief guiding the hand of justice with an almost palpable, unified force that could be terrifying in its unanimity. The lines between a simple moral transgression, a minor social disruption, and an outright criminal act were often blurred, fluid, and interpreted through a shifting, sometimes arbitrary, lens of local custom. Pervasive religious dogma and deeply ingrained personal honor. A nagging wife disrupting household peace, a drunken reveler causing a ruckus in the street, a cheating baker jeopardizing the community's very sustenance, or a suspected witch believed to wield dark, malevolent powers that threatened crops or health. Each faced distinct forms of justice meticulously tailored to their perceived offense. Each punishment was designed either to forcefully realign them with societal expectations through shame and pain, or to entirely remove them from the tightly woven social fabric through banishment or the ultimate finality of death. The pervasive influence of the Church was omnipresent, infusing almost every legal process with deep spiritual weight, transforming earthly trials into perceived divine judgments, and public executions into solemn acts of spiritual purification meant to cleanse the soul of both the condemned and, symbolically, the entire community from sin. For many, the fear of eternal damnation and divine retribution often loomed larger and more terrifying than any earthly penalty, making compliance with both secular and religious law paramount to their very salvation and future in the afterlife. The echoes of the church bells, once a call to prayer, could also toll the ominous sound of impending judgment, a chilling reminder of divine omnipresence. Yet, amidst the undeniable severity and occasional brutality, there was also a raw, deeply human element to this system. These were communities constantly grappling with deep-seated anxieties about sin. Chaos, famine, devastating disease, and the terrifying, unpredictable unknown that lurked just beyond their understanding. Often attributed to supernatural forces or divine displeasure. Their justice system, though undeniably harsh by modern standards, was a desperate, earnest attempt to impose order on a turbulent and often unforgiving world, to protect the fragile peace and stability they cherished, and to ensure the survival and moral integrity of the collective. The public nature of the punishments, while terrifying and often humiliating, also served as a powerful communal catharsis, reinforcing shared values, solidifying bonds against perceived evil, and drawing clear, unmistakable boundaries between acceptable and utterly unacceptable behavior. It was a stark, uncompromising logic for a stark, uncompromising age, reflecting a society where the visual, the visceral, and the immediate were paramount in reinforcing law and maintaining social cohesion. The echoing cries of the accused, the murmurs of the crowd, the chilling metallic sounds of the gibbet, creaking mournfully in the wind, and the flickering light of distant pyres casting long dancing shadows all combined to create an indelible, haunting impression on the minds of those who lived through it, shaping their understanding of right and wrong, and the inevitable consequences of deviating from the prescribed path. This shared experience of justice, harsh though it was, played a critical role in defining the social landscape and collective identity of medieval communities, binding them through fear, faith, and the constant public reminder of order, a powerful and undeniable force in their daily lives. It was a stark, living tableau that continually taught the unwritten laws of survival and belonging, a testament to the societal structures that endured for centuries. As we gently drift away from these distant echoes of medieval law, leaving behind the rattling chains, the solemn oaths, and the flickering flames of forgotten pyres, let us carry with us not harsh judgment of a bygone era, but a deeper, more nuanced understanding of humanity's enduring quest for order and justice across time. This journey has been a quiet contemplation of a world forged by different fears and animated by different beliefs, where justice wore a more visible, sometimes terrifying, and deeply symbolic face. It was a time when the spectacle of punishment was an integral, indeed often theatrical, part of the social order, a constant, tangible reminder of the fine line between conformity and chaos, between salvation and damnation, between life within the community and utter ostracization or destruction. The lessons of those times were etched not just in forgotten legal texts or dusty court records, but into the collective memory and even the very landscape of the medieval town itself, with its gallows hill and market square standing as silent witnesses to countless lives and judgments. This enduring legacy serves as a testament to humanity's enduring quest for order, however peculiar or severe its pews, manifestation across the vast stretches of history. A reminder that justice in all its forms and eras is a powerful mirror reflecting the society that wields it. May the quiet understanding gained from this historical journey bring a gentle tranquility as you rest, allowing the echoes of the past to finally fade into the profound peace of the present moment, carrying only the soft, reflective hum of knowledge gained and the lasting impression of a world shaped by its own unique sense of right and wrong.